Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2026. Summer is just less than a few weeks away, the actual start of the summer season. So I hope everyone's doing good. Yeah, it's 11 o'clock. Uh, yeah, had a really fun show the other day at the Sea Hag Brewery in Rockport. Had a quantum show there. It was my first time playing there. Really cool venue. It's like a hard cider brewery, and it's kind of an interesting place. It's like the building that it was in used to be a bakery, and it was a couple of different businesses before. But then the Sea Hag moved in and took over, and it's a really cool spot. And I had heard about the Sea Hag a few months ago, probably like late winter, because of another. I had heard about it through another band that I'm going to be playing with this summer, kind of a newer project, and they had booked a gig there, and it was right in Rockport, which is really close to my house. It's about 15-20 minute drive, and it was a band gig that they had booked, and that's how I'd heard about it. So I looked into it, and then I was kind of busy for a while, like trying to like book some gigs, and mainly usually for when it comes to just kind of how things are usually. I play in a few different bands, but usually when it comes to booking stuff on my own, I try to like focus on quantum. Usually, I don't know. Usually, in each band or each project, there's always like kind of a point person who does the booking, and then usually that person who does the booking does the promotion as well. But then when it comes to the promotion part, we all try to help out a little bit, and then in those kinds of things. And then if I have something come up, like an opportunity or something, I will, try to get that particular band or that particular band or project. I will, try to get a show for that group. But for the most part, I try to focus on trying to get work for Quantum, and so I, was doing a lot of that kind of work earlier, a few months ago, or even less. And I'm still doing it here and there, but I was doing it a lot, and then so I was like, oh, maybe I'll check out this place. Maybe you know they'll uh, they'll like it. Maybe it could be a new venue. It's close, and all those kinds of things. So I looked into it, and I sent them some promo stuff, some music stuff, some clips, and they seemed to really like it. And then usually for people who don't know how kind of this stuff always works, a lot of the times with booking gigs and all these kinds of things, you definitely have to have a lot of patience, and you can't take things personal, because you're gonna you deal with it anyway, but you're gonna deal with like rejection, and you're gonna deal with, you know, you're gonna have some really good positive interactions, but it always goes back and forth, and you can't take it personal or personally. Years ago, I was in a band where I was doing or attempting to do the booking, and this was going back a long time ago, and I would take things kind of personal, like rejection. I had a hard time with that, and it was just kind of I was just kind of being immature about it. So someone else took over for the booking. But now when I started doing booking things. I started booking gigs. When I started my band Quantum, like I pretty much do everything for it. I Now it's just me. It's literally just me. So I usually, when it comes to gigs of where there's not a sound system, like if I'm playing a gig, or a gig comes up and I'm going to be playing at a place where they don't have a sound system, there's no sound guy, then I have to, bring my own sound. So I have to like run sound too, and so that takes a while to get used to, and I'm still learning about that. I recently bought some new equipment for my PA, and I just had this past weekend. on Sunday was the first gig that I had with the new equipment, and it seemed like it went really well. So I'm pretty excited about the stuff I purchased. So you have to do that, and then when it comes to the gig stuff, I do usually the booking. And being now that it's just me and the band, it's obviously way easier to see if I'm free or not, and if I can do it, or if I'm just into it. And then there's that. And then when you get in contact with the club or the venue, you have to kind of work out, the pay and what that includes, like what you might get paid, what you can get paid, how long you're going to be playing for, and then all those kinds of things. And then obviously the big thing to see is if that venue has sound or not, and if there's a sound guy, or you have to provide your own stuff. And then you try to book the gig, and then after that, if you do secure the gig, then you're going to you're involved with doing the promotion for it too. So you have to do the promotional work, which takes I think in some ways it's a little bit easier with social media now. It's a little bit easier because if you have like Instagram and you have some social media platforms, it's a little bit easier that way. But still, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of posting, and you have to like do a lot of that stuff, and you have to do it to a point of where the timing of it is kind of right, and all of those things. And so that takes a lot of time, but it's a lot of fun. And going into this venue, I was well, it's a new venue, and so I was able to get a few gigs for the summer, which was nice. And so I was not sure like how our music would really. They seemed to like the music. I got good feedback from the music that I sent them, some live stuff and some studio stuff, but I wasn't sure how it would go in the venue, because a lot of the times for I think this kind of venue in particular is more of a place of where they have singer songwriters, and it's more of you know they'll have a basically a person play there with an acoustic guitar playing covers, and that's kind of what it is, or it's just kind of background music. And it's not like maybe a typical thing that you can play, where this it's not a place where you would normally see electronic music or music that's a little bit kind of weird, or all original music, especially. So it's always, but you never know. You just, so I'm a little bit more, um, like I'm willing to try things out a little bit more and more each year, because you just never, I've been really surprised. But I did have this one experience where it's kind of the same scenario of like what this past Sunday was. So I was a little bit worried about it. Where I had booked it. There's a local venue that I had some friends that was basically the same scenario. Where I had some friends that were playing at this one venue. Pretty cool spot. They're doing well. At the time, this was like a couple of years ago now. I was I was like, okay, cool. This looks like a new venue, more of a bar kind of a vibe. They were doing live music, pretty close to here. I had heard about it, so I did the same thing. I got their contact, and then sent in some promo stuff. Sent them some live music, and then I got back. They got back to me relatively quickly, and they seemed to really like the music, and they were into it, and they were like, yeah, we really want to try something different, and do something a little bit unique. So we ended up booking. I was at first trying to just get one gig, but then we ended up booking a few gigs, and it was cool. It was like 3 or 4 gigs we booked, and it was like, I think the time of the year was like springtime or something like that, going kind of almost this time of year, and this was a few years ago. So we booked a few gigs, and I was excited. And it was great, and I knew we had to run our own sound. So we went the day of the gig. Went to the venue and brought all of our gear. We set it up, and it was one of the weirdest gigs ever. I think I've ever played. And we played our set, and it was right before we played. The whole place filled up with all of these like sports team athletes, and it was like filled to the brim with like all of these like jocks and all these people that played in like basketball or football or something, and they were like super loud and just like burying us in the background, like, so we were like totally background and we couldn't really be heard, but we just played, and the place itself was busy, and I thought, okay, nobody was throwing stuff at us, but it was just really awkward because we were being drowned out, and we turned up a little bit to kind of maybe be heard, or and and we got through we played the gig, and it felt like it went okay. The sound was a little bit weird because of that, and I don't think we played our best, and but it was okay. And then we played the gig, and then went up to the owner, and we got paid at the end, and they seemed to be pretty happy with the show for the most part. The bar itself was pretty full, and but I didn't really, during the show, and we played like a couple hours. I couldn't get a sense of what people were thinking, or if they were. I couldn't tell if people were kind of into it or not. I mean, because you can kind of tell right away, when you're playing a gig, whether it's going to see a gig, you can see how the audience reacts, or going to see a show, or in this case playing a show, you can kind of gauge the audience within about 20 minutes to see if like people are into it. Sometimes it's right away you can tell. Sometimes it's like they're just kind of checking you out, and they're kind of warming up to you, or they're just not into it, and that obviously affects your output, your performance. But it seemed like I couldn't really read what was going on from people, and I kind of got the feeling that people were just kind of like ignoring us, or that we were just totally like background music, or I don't know. Some people were somewhat, I guess, kind of engaged, but it was really hard to tell. It was really hard to read. Overall, I felt like it didn't really go over great. That was the feeling that I got. So at the end of the night, we packed up our stuff, got paid, and I went, and the owner, the booking person, seemed pretty happy, and then that was that. And then we had scheduled a few other gigs, and then and then that was that. So then went home, and then 3 days later, I got an email from the booking agent, the woman who did the booking for the show, and also was the owner, and said that she was going to cancel the rest of our gigs that we had there. And we had like three, I think we had two or three other gigs booked there, and these were Friday nights, and so she said she was going to cancel all of our gigs because people did not like our music, I guess, at all. And she said that people at the bar were actually complaining about our music, saying that it was terrible and weird, and they were like they hated it or something. And she actually had people complain, like not just say that they weren't digging it or wasn't their vibe. They were actually complaining that we should basically pull the plug, and that they were and I was like, oh man, shit, that really sucks. And she's like, and then she said, it's clearly not the kind of music for our venue. We liked what you did. We were trying to do something new, but we're going to cancel your gigs. And I was just like, oh, and it was kind of, it was kind of awful. So we lost all these gigs, and then we lost, a lot of money. And I kind of felt the situation was a little bit shitty with it, but it was what it was. And so I was a little bit, and for some reason that situation really bothered me for a while, because I was like, oh man, because I worked to try to get this gig, tried to be flexible, and it is what it is. And then to have the gigs canceled, it was a bummer. And so that was that. And then um so I was a little bit worried about that happening this time, but that didn't happen, I don't think. And went really well, and it was actually really great, I felt. So you just never know. You have to have that. I guess it's kind of a skill to be able to, like, kind of gauge those things, not take things personal. I mean, I did take it personally, and it's easy. It's hard not to, I guess, in those kinds of circumstances. But I think, all of those things are part of the whole process, and I think anybody out there, who is, a live musician playing gigs, and I think this particularly pertains to when an artist is doing original music, and especially if it's music that's not like, you know, I guess commercial music or music that is maybe a little bit on the fringe side. You have to have a pretty good sense of how to navigate through those things and deal with a little bit of adversity. And that was one of the experiences that, even though it was tough and it was hard, I learned a lot from that situation, and I didn't let it like ruin me or bum me out so much to where I was like, oh, throw my hands up in the air. But it's all part of it, and I ended up learning a lot from that as far as business perspective of how you deal with an audience, the different ways you can deal with an audience, and then how you just deal with rejection, because that is part of the game. I mean, that's inevitable. You also have a lot of good things, and you have a lot of you can have a lot of good opportunities, or people really do embrace your stuff. And I've been really fortunate to keep this weird little band that I have, Quantum, together for a long time now, 10 years, and it's mostly been all in the positive side. But I think you have to learn from those negative experiences. But anyway, so I wanted to do a quick show on kind of this whole new thing with all these new filmmakers that have just, especially in the horror genre. I you know that I went to go see last weekend on when did I go see when did I go to the movies? I went on Saturday. Was it Saturday? Yeah, I went on Saturday with a friend to the theater to see Backrooms. This brand new horror film directed by Kane Parsons, who is 20 years old. Which to me, every time when I found out after I saw Backrooms, I uploaded a review for Backrooms yesterday, I believe. And this movie is, I think, incredible. I was totally blown away by this movie. One of the best movies I've seen this year, if not the best as far as new movies. But it's been a pretty awesome year. I thought 2026 was getting off to a pretty slow start, but it's kind of been on, and there's been some really great movies. And one of the things, like, I went with my buddy Kyle to see this movie, and one of the things that we talked about after the movie was the sheer amount of new horror films that are coming out is just insane. Like, again, this channel, Film Fanatic, is. I mean, I try to cover all kinds of movies. I do love all genres, but for the most part, it's all horror films, especially horror films in the exploitation world. But it's all things horror. That's the majority of my. Even though I try to bring new, different things, I've been doing music shows on the channel again. I do some interviews, trying to do that eventually again, interview segments, and I cover lots of different styles of filmmaking, but for the most part, it's always horror. That makes up the majority of these videos. It you know it kind of hit me this week or so, where I was like, holy shit, the amount of horror films that have been coming out just within the last 2 or 3 years, and even now in 2026, it's crazy. And we were talking about that, and I really think that the genre of horror all around is probably bigger now than it's ever been. Like, this is the biggest time where you know it's actually, to a degree, the genre has almost, well, it was last year with a lot of movies that came out the last couple of years, but even kind of acknowledged a little bit more by the Academy Awards. Sinners, for instance. But for the most part, I'm like, I could really give a shit or care less about the Academy Awards and all that stuff. It's just kind of garbage. But still, I have to admit that even the genre of horror film, the genre of horror, for years and years and years has always been ignored by the powers that be, the Academy Awards and all these big award shows and things. But that's kind of changed. I will say, like with this past year or this year, with the amount of films that were talked about, and even some of the people who won awards, some of the actors, most notably Sinners from last year, which was a really good movie overall, and it's definitely a horror film. And there's been other changes too. So that has shifted even on that kind of weird commercial level, even though I don't really I don't buy into it at all. But overall, like the amount of horror films that have been coming out and the attention that they're getting, and that what seems to be this thing of where they're making a lot of money, making a shit ton of money, and some of them are in the top slots of the box office every weekend, or either like number one or in the top five, and it's wild. It's kind of crazy. Going into 2026, I was, because I felt last year, 2025 and 2024 were really good years. Really good years for movies, but especially in the horror world. There were some really great movies that came out, like The Substance, In a Violent Nature, Long Legs. I thought there were some really great horror films that had come out, and it's like kind of been this continuation. But I did think that 2026 was off to a little bit of a slow start. But then I saw Send Help, the new Sam Raimi film, and I really liked that a lot. I was really surprised with that. Over My Dead Body was another film that I saw, um, which was a really cool, like, blending of horror, action, comedy. Really cool movie. And then getting to see Obsession, which was unbelievable. And I'm probably going to be leaving out a couple of movies because I have seen some really good ones. And then Backrooms just this past weekend, and I know I'm probably leaving out too, but there's been some really good movies, and I've been really surprised. And the thing that I wanted to talk about mostly with this show was this whole, like, I kind of feel like one of the things we talked about was after the film, my buddy and I, after seeing Backrooms, was that it seems right now horror is bigger than it's ever been. And I grew up in the 80s. I'm an 80s kid. Talked about that whole experience growing up in the 80s, and being exposed to slasher movies, Italian horror films, American horror films, all the European horror films, and growing up, in that generation when those things were coming out. And then, eventually becoming the freak, I guess, that I am today, becoming a film fanatic and getting really into buying movies more and more, which is something I've always done, and being a collector and a big avid watcher of films and all these things. So I was just talking about that actually last night with a friend. I was talking to somebody about who had actually come to see a Quantum show a few weeks ago or last month, and they had never seen us before, and she was asking me like, how would you, like, what kind of influences you guys, like, or what influences the sound that you have. And I said, like, yeah, there's a lot of different styles, but the main thing is for me with Quantum, as far as like the biggest inspiration, are movies, soundtracks, film scores. So it's just a thing that's always been a part of me. And I do feel like that influence, that craving of checking out more and more cool movies, it just grows with me even more each year. The Substance, I meant to say that was another fantastic film that came out, fairly recently in the last couple of years. So there's been some amazing films. But we were talking about, I think I had said to Kyle, I think the horror genre right now is bigger than it's ever been. And then the other thing that we talked about was, I feel like as a fan of horror, and just as a fan of films, but especially when it comes to horror films, I feel like we're kind of in this interesting historical space where I think we're starting to see, I don't know, changing of the guard, but we're starting to see, I think we're seeing history being made. That's kind of how I think of it. And when I talk about that or think of that, it's all in regards to just within the last year or two of all of the new filmmakers that have been putting out all original films and movies, and some have been very, very successful as far as making a financial impact. Is the rise of all of these new YouTube, internet-based content creators that have kind of transitioned into becoming filmmakers, and they're all young. They all have these amazing technical skills. Technical. They have a certain kind of savviness. They know how to use technology. They're using these. They're in a very modern way. They're very efficiently equipped, but they're telling all original content, original stories, and original films, and they're all very different from each other, and they're all unique and different, and they're all seem to be already, a lot of these new filmmakers already seem to have, I don't know, like a sense of style, or their own style of how you can kind of identify their work, which is really interesting. And kind of early on, or early on. When I think of directors that I grew up on, and directors that I loved, we just thinking of directors like, well, Stanley Kubrick, my favorite director, but like Lucio Fulci, Martin Scorsese. I mean, John Carpenter. The list is endless. Herschel Gordon Lewis, who I've been watching. I've been back to watching Herschel Gordon Lewis films. Like, to me, all of those guys, like when you watch a Scorsese film, you watch a Herschel Gordon Lewis film, you watch a Lucio Fulci film, or you watch a Mario Bava film, or Jess Franco film. You just know, like for me, you just know that these guys, like, you're watching one of their films because they have a very, you know, distinct style, a very distinct way of being a storyteller, and executing a film and executing ideas. But with those guys, it's a little bit different. And obviously, I said Stanley Kubrick because they have a huge body of work, and I own a lot of those directors that I just talked about. I own a lot of their films, if not all of their films, on Blu-ray. And some of those directors I grew up watching, or some of those directors I fairly recently discovered and have become kind of obsessed with their work. But you kind of, like, for me, I can kind of tell right away, like, they just have this certain kind of style. And one of the things I've seen with some of these newer films made by some of these young YouTube creators, where they more or less started on YouTube, is they seem to have already, even if it's in a case of a movie that I didn't really like a lot, the one thing I noticed, there seems to be already this thing of where these directors, these new, fresh faces, kids, which is crazy, already have this kind of sense of a style, or you can almost kind of identify them already in their work, which is kind of wild. Because usually, and I think of this in terms of, a band, or really anybody in the arts that, whether you're a writer or a dancer or whatever it is, a filmmaker in this case, or a musician or a band, a lot of the times it takes most of the time it takes that artist to kind of create their own identity, where people will see, or they can identify their music or their art right away because it's uniquely them. And sometimes that, for artists and people out there, it I think there's cases of where that doesn't really happen yet, or it might not happen, because it could be a thing of where you just see so much of their influences, like, to the point of where it can be cool and interesting, but you just hear so many other influences where and all these different things, but
Powering
it's
off.
never about them. And maybe that person or that artist never really finds that their style, that link. And that's really tricky. And I think part of the reason, like, mentioning those other classic directors, giants in cinema, it's they reached that point, I think, really because of their track records as filmmakers, their body of work. They've amassed this incredible amount of just a huge body of work, and through all of those experiences and through that content, that's where their style kind of emerged. But what I think what's kind of happening now is some of these filmmakers now, these brand new fresh faces, they have this kind of unique style already, and I've noticed that already. And it's like, and in these cases, this is like their first film, so it's really unique. Um, yeah, really, really unique. And the thing of this kind of transitional period, I think we're really seeing changing of the guard, and where these kids who have been doing or been involved with highly successful uh, YouTube channels for number of years have been making these transitions into becoming full fledged filmmakers, which is it's super interesting. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting thing to see. I think with I mean, some of those examples are the Philippou brothers, two brothers that have been making horror films the last couple of years. I do believe they kind of started off on YouTube as well. Um, they made films Bring Her Back, and also they made the films Bring Her Back, and then also Talk to Me, in the last couple of years. New kind of independent horror films, pretty low budget, um, but I'm not honestly a huge fan of those films, but I give them lots of accolades. I do want to revisit those films. Wasn't totally sold on those films, but I do give those guys a lot of praise. Even that being said, because they're making all original work, and it does have a very unique thing to it, and it is a very distinct thing that these guys are doing. And they're pretty smart, and they are very good filmmakers, and I am excited to see you know their 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 work. And another YouTube guy, Markiplier, who has been around for a very long time, he recently made his first feature length. I think it's called Iron Lung, which I have not seen, but it looks kind of interesting. And he has been Markiplier still is, but he's Markiplier has been a YouTube guy for a very long time, mostly doing kind of like video game reviews and I think short little films and different kind of media stuff. But I think it's more his channel has been mostly centered on kind of gaming stuff. But he is now a filmmaker, and he made his own film based. I think it's based on a video game as well, Iron Lung. And it is a movie I do really want to see. It does look really cool and interesting. I almost got a chance to see it in the theater, but I think it's coming out on DVD or physical media soon. But it made a ton of money when it came out, and totally independent, totally off the radar. And so it was pretty wild. It was, I think it was almost might have been number one when it first came out, and it was like incredible. It was shot for an incredibly low amount of money. And then one of the biggest new discoveries is uh, Curry Barker, who is again another YouTube guy, kid, 26, who is um, just just fantastic. I found out about Cory Barker a few years ago. Actually, I should say, yeah, at least a year ago. I had heard about this movie Obsession that had been mentioned in a few YouTube videos through a couple of people that I watch on YouTube, because this film Obsession, which came out just a few weeks ago, I had heard about this film because it did premiere at a couple of big film festivals, and these reviews, or the way I heard about this movie Obsession, was through a couple of YouTube guys that were saying that they had gotten a chance to see it, and they said that this movie was like completely fucking insane and unhinged. And then when the film premiered, and that's one of the big things for a lot of these films to get, a lot of these smaller independent films to get into, the reason that a lot of them try to get into a lot of these festivals is so they can get like distribution. And eventually it did, and it got picked up by uh, Bloomhouse, I believe. So, and Corey Barker, I had heard about this film, and there was all this great talk, but there, that saying that this movie was incredible, but there was no release date. It wasn't picked up by a distributor yet, and all these things. So I didn't know when I was gonna get a chance to see it. So I took it upon myself to just check out Curry Barker's web page, his YouTube channel, and he primarily like does these kind of little like black comedy skits, but then he also does these very short little micro budget little short horror films. And I checked out some of his videos. I checked out some of these movies, and he would upload. There's a handful of Milk and Cereal is probably the one that's probably the best. That's actually really good. But it's only like, I think it's 15 minutes or so. But he would upload these little short videos, basically little mini movies, to his channel for free. And they really acquired a big audience. And he got really big and popular. He amassed this huge audience through that and really built up this YouTube channel. And then that's what he was doing up until he, decided to more or less crowdfund and put together this film that he wrote and directed, Obsession. That's the other thing with these YouTube guys, Philippus Brothers included, and also Markiplier, is that they are also, some of them, a lot of them have multifaceted backgrounds. They're really good editors. They are really great directors. They also write their own material. They also star in their own material. It's kind of wild. They also edit everything. I believe Markiplier wrote it. Again, I haven't seen it yet. I've heard some mixed things about it, but I still want to see it. I believe he, for Iron Lung, directed his film, directed the movie, stars in it, wrote the screenplay, and fucking edited it all at once. And I do believe Corey Barker, while he directed Obsession, I do believe he wrote Obsession, and he actually edited it himself, which is fucking crazy. Because, anybody who knows, well, a little bit about film, but, the editing part, I mean, essentially, you have to get good actors, you have to get a great script, and you have to, like, get the shots, that you really need. But editing is, I think, at the end of the day, editing is really, I think, what makes a film or what breaks a film. I've always heard so many stories over the years with, famous directors, directors like Ridley Scott or James Cameron talking about, their first cuts of Alien and Aliens, like when they would show just the footage of when things weren't really edited together, they would have these screenings, and they've talked about their experiences of where the movies were, the initial reaction from people when they would show these like really rough cuts of the movie was that it looks really great and fantastic, but the movie itself there's no movie, and it doesn't really make any sense, and it's too long, and there's no cohesiveness. Even though, like, I've seen that talked about with Ridley Scott, where he talked about, Blade Runner, the same kind of thing. They knew like these shots that they were getting were just like jaw dropping, but until it was edited properly, it didn't make any sense, and it wouldn't be something that people could sit through. And he talked about that same thing with Alien, and James Cameron went through that whole experience, with little test screenings of Aliens the sequel, where it was kind of a disaster. So they had to like really work incredibly hard to assemble and make sense of it all. So you can have something that looks, like the highest, most beautiful piece of art visually and everything, but if it's not put together the right way and edited the right way, until that point you're not gonna have a story. So, when I heard that Corey Barker not only fucking edits his movies too, like or Obsession, that's crazy. Like that's nuts. That's just like that's wild to me. That's just totally mind-boggling. And he's only 26. And I think Markiplier is very young as well. The Philippines brothers, also very, very young. So, yeah, just pretty inspiring. Really inspiring. And now with Kane Parsons, who is the director of Backrooms. Again, a YouTube guy, YouTube kid, who, which I went into Backrooms totally cold. I had a friend, my great friend Sean Russell. I didn't know anything about this movie until he sent me a trailer for Backrooms, and it's an A24 film as well. So I didn't know anything about it, and so he sent me this trailer, and I think it might have been a relatively short trailer for Backrooms, and I saw the trailer and I was like, wow, this looks really good. What the hell? Where did this come from? I didn't know anything about it, and I saw this little trailer, and I was really intrigued. I was like, this looks really awesome. Totally original, totally unique. It looked pretty scary, pretty creepy. And then after that, I stayed away from everything around this movie. I didn't check out any. I did the same thing with Corey Barker's Obsession. I had heard initially that this movie was like really good, but then I didn't watch any trailers. I saw a little bit of a trailer when I went to the movies, and they had a trailer for Obsession, but it was a short trailer, so it didn't give anything away. But I intentionally stayed away because that's more. Obviously, that's more enjoyable. It doesn't really affect me too much if I check out or review now or two on a certain film. Like that's one thing I've noticed about me as I've gotten older. It doesn't really affect me. I could still have my own kind of personal experience with the film. Whereas when I was younger, it kind of would get in the way of that, but now it doesn't. But still, that being said, I love to go into film I love to go see a movie knowing as little as possible. Obviously, I always hear a little bit of, under the surface kind of murmurs or buzz about something. And then I have a couple of people that I follow a lot on YouTube or whatnot that I think have a really good sense of things that are good, or if I get a recommendation from a friend, that's what I'll go on, as far as my kind of motivation to actually go see the film and to see it in the theater. But Kane Parsons, is the director for Backroom. So I saw this trailer, went into it totally cold, and I was blown away by this movie. It's absolutely incredible, totally original, totally unique. It's an experience. It's bizarre as all hell. It's crazy. It's actually a great horror film. Has some really awesome science fiction elements. It's a psychological horror. It's just great. I just love how original it was. I really want to see it again. And Kane Parsons is a kid. He's 20 years old, which is completely crazy. Completely crazy. And again, I didn't know anything about him, who he was, who directed it, until when I saw the film, and I went with my friend Kyle, he told me about who he was, who this young kid is, Kane Parsons, and that this film was an A24 film, and he's a new YouTube guy. And I think this movie, well, Obsession was shot for under $1 million. I think a little bit under, and it that movie has made an insane amount of money for what it's worth. It kind of set these records. Both of these movies, both Obsession and Backrooms, have both set these records that of situations or things that have never happened in the film industry before. Where one of the things with Obsession was, again, it's a very low budget movie, but within a day or two, it made twice the amount of money that it came out. And usually, when a movie comes out, typically, in theaters, it, it will either do really, really well, have a good opening, good solid opening, or a really big opening, or it won't do very, very well. It came out and it had a good opening, but typically, what happens with all kinds of films in the box office is once the film gets into its like second or third weekend, it drops off. It starts dropping off. Like it kind of has this cycle thing of where it just kind of it does eventually drop off. With Obsession, it did totally the opposite, where it actually, you know, the second, third weekend, it actually became bigger, and it's never historically that's never happened for a film. Whether it's a super low budget movie that gets a big distribution deal or is playing in national theaters, or it's a big budget or low budget film. That's never happened, and it was expanded only by the second week, I believe. From what I was reading, Obsession was only expanded by like something like, I don't know, 40 or 50 theaters, like not very much, but yet it still made that much more money. And it's all because of, I think, word of mouth. And that there have been people who have gone back a second time to see this movie, and they've brought people. And that it's a movie that I do want to see again, very much so. Really interesting. Like totally like word of mouth, kind of a grassroots, guerrilla style kind of a thing. And not it doesn't fit at all, like none of this stuff that's happening doesn't fit at all within this kind of corporate bullshit that we're marred down with, as far as, you know where there are a lot of executives in a lot of these big studios that churn out, all of the mediocre or crappy MCU movies continually, or just really bland films constantly, and they kind of feel like, well, people just want the same kind of shit. They want the same regurgitated ideas. They want to eat that Big Mac every day. And it's like, sure, there are people out there that want that level of familiarity or be comfortable and get the same old shit, repackaged. Like, that is a factor. But I do think there's a lot of people, and I think in all actuality, there's more people out there that want something new, that want something fresh, that want some new ideas. Even in the case of, like, if it's not super successful, or it might not be your cup of tea. I mean, that's how I feel about Bring Her Back by the Philippou brothers, or even Talk to Her. Like, I want to revisit those films. I was not a huge fan in a lot of ways of some of those movies, but I'd rather see something like that because those guys are still very good filmmakers. I'm excited to see what they do next. And they're doing original stuff. They are, even if it's in the case of, like, I'm not a huge fan of their work, but I do like their stuff and I do want to revisit it. But even that being all said, they are doing something new and fresh. And I rather see something like that. And so I think that there are people, and I do think I do think that the general Hollywood system generalizes the public and thinking that everybody is wants the same thing. And I don't think that's the case. And I think what we're seeing, I think most people want something new. I think most people want new ideas and fresh ideas. I think there's a lot, or maybe that might be a little bit much to say. Maybe not most, but there's a lot of people that do crave new things, new ideas, something fresh, something that might be a little bit challenging, something I haven't seen before. I do think there's enough people out there that really want that, and I think that what's been happening with these two films and just this past year with these YouTube guys, and especially with the insane success of Backrooms and especially Obsession and Iron Lung, that to me that's a primetime example of that, because whether you like these movies or not, you have to give them a check in the column for, I don't know, a super A for effort, but they're all original. It's all original work for the most part. It's all new stuff. It's all fresh ideas. It's all things we haven't really seen before. It's not based necessarily, well, Iron Lung is kind of a video game, but it's not necessarily all based on something we have seen over and over again, an IP or established franchise, or based on a famous novel, based on a famous book, or all those things. This is all more or less coming from pure imagination. So automatically that for me is a win-win. Even in the case if I don't like the film. And we're seeing that now. I think we're seeing that being reflected back with what these films are making in the box office, that people do want to see, do crave a lot of new things. We don't always want the same shit. And I think it's unfortunate that the powers that be, I think they still do feel that way, but they underestimate people and they generalize audiences. And I think we're seeing the real results of that, and we're seeing that that's not the case. And Backrooms has been, I mean, it was already named, A24 has become, they've been around for quite a few years, but they're a very, very powerful company now, but they're, for the most part, a independent company, and they make a lot of, really great independent horror films and all these things. And I've been a big fan of their work for a long time. Some of the movies, some of A24's work, some of their films have been a little bit hit or miss for me, but same thing of Blumhouse, But I do think when Blumhouse, which distributed Obsession, when Blumhouse does it right, they do it right. And I think when A24 does it right, they do it right. Blumhouse has had a lot of, well, crappy films that they've put out, I think the last year or two, but they have done some incredible things. So one of the things that I got from watching Obsession was I felt like this was a return to form for Blumhouse as far as really getting behind a project that is really interesting and new and unique and pretty bold. It kind of reminded me of the time of when, they started Jordan Peele's career, and that the time of when Get Out, his first film came out, and that was a Blumhouse film. An incredible film, an incredible film. It kind of felt like it was taking me back to that time, like making me excited, and that kind of thing. So they have that. They have done that, and they have made some great films, as well as A24. But A24, this film, Backrooms, was the biggest. Backrooms has made more money than any other A24 film ever. And it's wild because, well, it's elevated horror, so it's thinky horror films. Um, but it's wild. It's the biggest. He's also, Kane Parsons is the youngest filmmaker right now that was basically given the reins to be creative and make this film that has gone on to become very successful. And so we're seeing kind of like this shift, and I think we're seeing things happen in kind of the industry and then also outside of the industry happening that we've never really seen before. And I think we're kind of seeing history in the making, as far as independent voices, filmmakers, really creative things are happening. And in some ways, it's not really anything different because I did see an interview with somebody online, and he was talking about this kind of thing. Who I believe this was another YouTube guy, but he made some interesting points, saying it's not like anything. It's a different time. It's a different decade. It's a different era. But it's not anything different than, like, say, when you had, Francis Ford Coppola or Scorsese or George Lucas when they were like kind of emerging or Toby Hooper, any of those great directors, even John Carpenter, where it's not anything really different in regards to the emergence of new faces, new fresh talent, new voices, new incredible directors, because those guys were doing the same thing, but they were emerging from like making student films. That was their medium. They made student films. Now, this next crop of kids and young filmmakers are cutting their teeth creating videos, learning how to learning new technology at their just and having all of these technical skills, how to edit video, how to shoot video, how to create all of this new content. But it's essentially the same process. It's just a different, it's 2026, and with the internet, it's just a different skill set, but it's essentially the same thing. But I still think we are kind of witnessing something really special. And being such a horror fan for soul, like since I was a kid, and it still will always be my favorite genre. I'm really inspired by all of this. I really am. I think it's just really inspiring. I think it's because there's obviously there's a lot of shit in this world, and this whole kind of thing that's been happening, I think is really inspiring and really, there's a little bit of light and dark in the darkness. I think that it's really inspiring. It is kind of hopeful. And I think, with the genre, with the genre of horror, which is so massive and so giant, and arguably now it's bigger than it's ever been. There always has to be a point in a genre for a genre to kind of move forward, or to stay, some to stay around, that is saying something, or that contemporary in a contemporary way. There always has to be situations or people in that industry or people in the genre that or directors that have to like take some chances and push and move things forward in a progressive way. There always has to be. You can have a lot of rehashed ideas, a lot of things that are of the same thing over and over again, because there are blueprints and there are the formulas that are made, that people will copy and paste. But there always has to be voices within the genre that are going to always take that genre two steps forward. And I think that's really what we're seeing. And in order for it to be still a viable thing and for it to keep growing. And I think we're definitely seeing that now. I feel like we're starting to see that new emergence of like the new crop of like the Stanley Kubricks, the Coppolas, the Toby Hoopers, the Hershey Gordon Lewises. We're seeing those. We're seeing that happen right now, and I think it's very important and it's awesome. So I just wanted to do a show on kind of my thoughts of this whole kind of new generation of film, these new filmmakers, these new films that have been coming out, this weird and interesting but very cool kind of transition as far as what the box office is or what it could be. It's very interesting. things that are independent, things that are commercially accessible. So very interesting time as far as those things go. But thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Peace.